Sorry, but you keep freezing just so that you know.
I know. I see from how much time it's taking to go online. The solution for that is to come in person. That's the solution. Here on person, there's nothing to freeze.
No, you're right.
All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Kalayim, Pei Gimel, Halacha Dalid. We're going to be learning today Daf Lamed Aleph. We left off on Daf Lamed Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, in the beginning of the Gemara, Haneteya Shtei Shurais V'chulei. And what we're going to do today is very interesting. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to go to Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. We're going to go to the next halacha, to halacha Hey, and we're going to learn it inside. And for those of us who have an art scroll, please go to page 32B1, and Kevan is going to put the picture up on the Zoom for those who are watching the Zoom. Now, what we're going to do is like this. Very good. In Halacha Dalid, right, in the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, let's word it like this. We learned 2 dinim that complement one the other. Number 1 is that when we spoke about the 3 items of Kishuyin, Deluyim, and Pul HaMitzri, items that have long vines and leaves, and therefore, even if they will be given this distance that is regularly sufficient to separate rows of different species, it's not sufficient for these species, for Muksha species. What we learned in the Mishnah is, in the first case of the Mishnah, is that if you planted 2 rows, and every row in the Mishnah here is 4 amos. 2 row means 8 amos, right? The first case of the Mishnah. So you planted 2 shurais of Kishuyim, and 2 shurais of Deluyim, and 2 shurais of Pul HaMitzri, which means that the space between the 2 outer rows are 8 amos, because the inner Deluyim is taking up 8 amos. And that's the number 1, that when it comes to these unique species, you have to have 8 amos of a separation between the outer ones for them to remain distinct. For the outer ones to remain distinct. And din number 2 is the din of chavush. Chavush means we're not allowed to close in on a species with another one. Normally, chavush would mean not to surround it by all 4 directions, maybe even perhaps by 3 directions. We never find, other than in our Mishnah, the possibility of chavush when something is being surrounded only by 2 sides. But here again, these items are unique because of their vines and leaves being very long and they extend outwards. So in order for the middle item not to be considered chavush, there needs to be a 8 amma separation between the outer rows. What I said is very important, and for those of us who are watching, you can go review and listen to this again. But these are 2 separate dinim that complement one the other. Now we're going to learn the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. The next halacha Hey, and over there we have a machlokes tanoim. And our daf today will be a machlokes between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan, whether our Mishnah is subject to the same machlokes that we have on the next Mishnah. And even though our Mishnah only spoke about 8 amos, it only goes according to the Tanoim that hold that 8 amos of a space is sufficient. And Rabbi Yochanan will hold that everyone in the following Mishnah will agree that in our case, 8 amos will suffice, as we will see. That will be the first part of today's daf. The second part of today's daf is that after we establish, right, let me use these words, guys. We're going to focus more on the second halacha that I mentioned. After we will establish clearly that in order to save the inner rows from being closed in, a minimum distance of the outer rows are required. Our Mishnah spoke about 8 amos, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, L'kula alma 8 amos. According to Chizkiya, really subject to a machlokes tanoim, maybe even 12 amos. But there is a minimum, whatever that number is. Once we establish that there is a minimum space needed between these 2 outer rows, in order for the inner one not to become closed in, now the Gemara is going to want to know that there also must be a certain minimum distance. There has to be a certain a minimum length of the outer rows for them to close on the inner row. Because if the outer rows are very short, then it's a nothing burger. And we don't know anywhere in the works of Tanoim what would that minimum length be. And the Gemara is going to give us a rule, which is a formula of he arkoi, he haflegoi. These words literally means that its length and its distance is the same. We're going to introduce a certain basic halacha regarding a vineyard, regarding a kedem. And we're going to say that just like the rule of the kedem is that, at least these are the words, guys, the minimum length is the maximum distance. Same thing will be over here, that the minimum length is the maximum distance, which would mean that if the maximum distance is 8 amas, for it not to be considered chavush, then the length of each row also has to be of 8 amas. And if it would be less than 8 amas, it would not create the problem of chavushing in, of closing in the inner row. If everything is a little bit foreign, good, that means we're learning something really new, which we are. And like I mentioned, before we even begin today's daf, let's do two things. Let's again quickly chazer the first scenario. That's all we're going to learn today, if we get through the whole thing of halacha dalit. So I'm pushing go on to the top of daf lamed amud beis. First case of the Mishnah is you have kishuyin. Again, we are translating kishuyin as a certain type of melon, a shaped melon. And if you plant it, that's not the picture yet, Kevin. Doesn't matter. I'm going to daf lamed amud beis. And a person planted 2 rows of shaped melons, which would mean they are planted in the width of 8 amas. After which, that's the outer one to the right. Then the middle one, you planted again 2 shurais, 2 rows, 8 amas of gourds. Then you planted another 2 rows of pula mitzvah. Now, make no mistake, guys. We already learned in the previous halacha gimel, that when you plant vegetables one near the other, what do you have to leave in between them? We had that rule. What you have to leave in between them is a gap of 6 tfachim width. And we learned, we're going to go with Rabbi Akiva, the way we learned it in the Rash, only 6 tfachim length. You left it there. These gaps obviously are needed. The question is whether they suffice, whether they are enough to get these unique 3 vegetables. So the Mishnah begins by saying that yes, it's enough. And why is it enough? Because since, this is the way we're wording it, since the distance between the 2 outer rows is 8 amas, because the deluyan is taking up 8 amas, so the outer rows are not considered to be mingling with each other. The outer rows and the inner row have the minimum distance. You have the telem of 6 by 2 by 6 tvachim. Elama, there's a new din of chavush, that since the outer rows are made from these unique species, it can so close in the inner row. The inner row will look like it's completely closed in, which would be a problem. We also do not say that. Why do we not say that? Because since the distance between the 2 outer rows is 8 amas, because the deloyan is taking up 2 shurais, so they don't affect chavush. They do not affect chavush on that which is inside. That's what we're going to focus on today. And now, Kevin, please put up the pictures for halacha hey, and we're going to learn now halacha hey, which really means that we're getting a little bit ahead. We're going to learn a shtickle that we're going to learn again, God willing, tomorrow. Now, the Mishnah a hay is speaking about a field that is made out of any other vegetable other than the 3 that we are discussing here. And as a mashal, we're using onions. It can mean any vegetable. For which we go back to halachic gimel, that what suffices to separate. If you want to plant amongst onions, let's say carrots, all you need to do is to leave a furrow of 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim. According to Rabbi Akiva, it does not even need to be mefulash. It doesn't even have to go to the tire freight. If you can take a look, not over here, but if you can take a look at if you can focus out of that one, Kevan, and focus in on the top right picture. I'm just using that as an example. Before you get into the 2 rows, stam, that furrow in halacha gimel is enough to allow you to plant different vegetables one near the other. And we're going to go again to the shita of the Rash that says that even if the rows of vegetables go beyond the furrow, which is what you have over here in the picture, which means they're going to mamish touch one the other, it's also going to be okay. because it's Yerakis, right? Yerakis to begin with need a lesser space than Zeroim. On top of that, you have the furrow. We don't need for the furrow to go through and through. You're good to go. The challenge in our halacha hey, as today's daf halacha dalid, is that gourds, deluyan, like Yeshuyim, like Pulamitzri, are unique. Sometimes the furrow will not be enough. So let's go into the case. You have a field of onions, and the you want to plant gourds. So we have over here three opinions. Now, the Gemara today won't focus that much on Rabbi Yishmael, but let's learn it, because we have Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, and the Chacham. Rabbi Yishmael says that oiker shtei shurais, we said, is 8 amis. But when you plant gourds, all you can plant is only 4 amas. So look inside. We're going now from left to right. So you have 2 rows of onions. Really, you had many more, but let's go with that. If you can take a look, if you want to plant in between the left one and the middle one gourds, how much area do you have to clear? 8 amas. But the way the 8 amas will be used, according to Rabbi Yishmael, is you can't fill up those 8 amas. You go to the middle of the 8 amas, right, which is the 4 in the middle. You have to look at the picture. And that is where you can plant the gourds. And you leave 2 amas of a gap on each side of the gourds. And only afterwards can you plant another row of onions. Now, why do you need to leave 2 amas? So it's not the way you think. You think you need to leave 2 amas to separate the gourds from the onions. No, it's not that. We need to leave, according to Rabbi Yishmael, 12 amas between the gourds to the left and to the next row of gourds to the right. You have to have, why do you have to have 12 amas? Now, I don't need for the whole 12 amas to be packed. All I need is that I don't care whether it's a gap, whether it's something else. There has to be a space of 12 amas between the gourds and the gourds. If you don't have those 12 amas, then the middle row of the onions will be considered chavush. Since gourds have these long vines, so the onions will be completely closed in now. Here, since you have 2 complete gap, then you have 8. You see what's going on of onions. Then you have another 2 gap. That allows for there to be 12 between the gourds and the gourds. That is the first sheet of Rabbi Yishmael. You know what Rabbi Yishmael holds? That you need to have 12 amas distance between 2 rows of gourds for you to be allowed to plant something inside without it be called being chavush.
Oh, do the gourds have to be inside the furrow?
No. It's not inside the furrow.
That's
on the ground. It's on the ground.
Well, no, it looks like.
In other words, Kevin, the furrow that we learned in Halacha Gimel B'chlal won't be sufficient. Won't help you at all. You have to have a gap separating the onions from the gourds. And the ikir of that we're going to be focusing on today is that you need 12 amas between the gourds and the gourds. Rabbi Akiva, I made opinion number 2. Please move on to the next picture. He holds that you only need to have a gap of 8 amas between the gourds and the gourds. And once you have the gap of 8 amas, you don't need to have Rabbi Akiva l'shitasoi in Halacha Gimel. You don't need to have a separation that goes mefulash. And take a look at the picture. In other words, there's 2 dinim. Number 1, all you need to separate one type of vegetable from the other, even if it's gourds from the onions, is a furrow of 6 by 6, which he placed in the bottom of the picture here. Amachayim. And the rest can go touch all the way adjacent. But even Rabbi Akiva will hold that the only reason why this is allowed is because the row of onions in the middle has the width of 8 amas. Because if the row of onions in the middle would have less than 8 amas, then the 2 outer rows of the gourds would chavush in the inner row of onions.
I'm sorry, what's the function of the furrow, the 6 by 6?
The 6 by 6 is halacha gimel, keva. When you plant 2 vegetables, one near the other, kalayim. And really, we learned you have to have, even by individuals, 1 tefach and a half. Here we are allowing for the topper part of the picture to go mamish touching. Doesn't matter because you have the furrow. Now, the Chachamim, they argue with Rabbi Yishmael. They don't hold that the vision has to be mefulash. That's the final bottom picture, the bottom picture. But they do hold, like Rabbi Yishmael, that the only way that gourds won't be closing in on the onions is only if the separation between one side of the gourds, one row, and the other row is at least 12 amas, like Rabbi Shmuel. Once you have that, all you need is the furrow of 6 by 6. That's the chacham. So Bekitzer, what do we see in that?
Is that like a combination of the two?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. In other words, if you remember, halacha gimel, only Rabbi Shmuel holds that whatever gap, I don't care if it's 6 tvachim, has to be mefulash. Once you do not agree with Rabbi Shmuel, it doesn't have to be mefulash. Then what? Why is our halacha daled unique? Because we said these 3 vegetables, they have long vines, they have long leaves, they end up kriching one into the other. So there has to be a larger gap for which purpose? For the outer ones, not to chavush in the inner ones. Really, in the next Mishnah, halacha hey, there's a machlokes. Rabbi Akiva says you need to have only 8 amas, and Rabbi Shmuel and the Chachamim, which would also be Rabbi Shmuel holds, you have to have 12 amas. And now let's come back to our Mishnah. Now it's obvious. What did our Mishnah? What was the first case again of our Mishnah? It's not a field of onions. You just rows. So a guy has 8 amas of kishuyim, and then he has 8 amas of deluyan, which is in the middle. Then he has 8 amas of pula mitzri. We're saying the kishuyim and the pula mitzri, if they are going to be within, if the space in between is less than 8 amas, whatever you plant there is not good. Chavush. Why don't we have chavush? Because the shurais of the deluyan is 2 shurais, which is 8 amas. So l'chu'ura, that's what the Gemara is going to be addressing. It comes out that our Mishnah only follows Rabbi Akiva. Because l'chu'ura, according to Chachamim and / Rabbi Yishmael, the 2, you're going to have 3 shuras of the luyin to allow the ratio of our Mishnah. Right? Right. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Hanatesh they shurais, quoting the first case of the Mishnah where it's mutar. So says Chizkiyahu, that only fits that Amar b'machlokes. The din of our Mishnah really is only siding with one side of an argument. But the same machlokes, the Aflamet Aleph now on top, the same machlokes that we have on halacha hey in the Mishnah, we're going to have over there. And let's read it inside on the Aflamet Aleph. That man, the Omar Kamon, those who say over there, who are those? Both Rabbi Yishmael and the Chachamim. That the distance that now the Mishnah later is speaking about onions in the middle. I know that's a difference. Don't forget, onions don't have this unique characteristic of it having long vines or long leaves. But nevertheless, we're not focusing now on what is planted in the middle. We're focusing on, like we mentioned in the words of intro, and the second detail that we learned yesterday, which is that for these 3 unique plants, kshuyim, deloyim, and pula mitzri, because of the way they grow, if you have a row of one of these 3 and a row of another one of these 3, if they are not distant, a minimum amount, whatever is planted inside becomes chavush, becomes closed in, and it may not be there. Our Mishnah, mutter, meaning even the deluyan, the middle one is okay. So it says...
Sorry, does chavush only apply to these 3 plants or always?
Chavush applies to any plants if you are surrounding... if species A is being surrounded by all sides by species B, no matter what that is, that's called chavush.
Thank you.
The chavush, which is unique for these 3, is that it's not being surrounded by 4 sides, it's only being surrounded by 2 sides. I want to jump quickly.
So why not karuch?
Why not?
Karuch, koirech.
Doesn't matter. That's a word. Chavush means in jail. You're being suffocated. What we should not do to our wives, to be chavish them. They have to breathe. Or if someone is doing it to you, allow yourself to breathe. So man do amar tamon shtei mesrei. Indeed, the Tanoim that say that in order for these unique 3, for them not to create a chavush to whatever is in the middle, they have to be separated by 12 amas. Indeed, in other words, the ratio of our Mishnah, according to the Chachamim, would be that if you plant 2 shurais of kishuyim, 3 shurais of deluyan, and 2 shurais of pula mitzri, then you're good. Only then you're good. However, only man the Amar Taman b'shmeina, only Shitas Rabbi Akiva will be the Tana of our Mishnah. Uf hachi b'shmainam. So says, which makes a lot of sense, right? So at least everything is aligned. The Mishnah here, for whatever reason, the fact that Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't quote the Machlokes here, why didn't you quote it the first time? The Gemara Chizki is not bothered with it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, no. Dafke, the first time we are able to introduce the Machlokes of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva Chachamim is only in the next Mishnah. Only when what you are planting in the middle is not one of these muksha vegetables. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, our Mishnah is Divrei HaKoil. Why? If you are planting onions in between muksha, in between the three are called muksha, then you're right. Then according to Rabbi Shmuel and according to the Chachamim, let's quote the Chachamim. Okay, because Rabbi Shmuel just has that other detail. Rabbi Shmuel is included in the Chachamim. The Chachamim hold that you have to have 12 amis in between the two outer gourds, which is the case in the halacha. But here, you're not planting onions in the middle. What are you planting in the middle? You are planting another one of a muksha. You're planting gourds in the middle. The fact that the one that's in the middle is itself a muksha type of vegetable, it does not allow itself to be trapped. Like when someone is trapped, so who is the guilty party? The answer is both. It's not only the perpetrator. Why did you allow yourself to be a victim? In other words, the middle one, that yafa koyach muksha bein ha-mukshais lahatzal b'shmeina, since the one in our Mishnah, not like the picture that you're showing here. I'll take away that picture because I don't want to focus on the gap. If any picture, you show the picture of the Chachamim. But in other words, since the middle one here are gourds, it's another one of the muksha. So even the Chachamim will be maida that in order, it can be less than 8 amas, but 8 amas will be good. Now you're going to see how this machlokes will be very much negeya to today's daf, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. And now let's move on.
Can I chime in for 1 second here?
Quickly, Danny, because we have to a lot of ground to cover stuff.
We're discussing these special species, these 3 species that require these big spaces, 12 amas or whatever, right?
Well, 8 amas here, yeah.
But so in the Mishnah that we learned in the beginning of today, Mishnah Hay, right?
Yes.
It's like there you're talking about, okay, we have 12, and one guy says 8. Rabbi Akiva says 8. Now we're going back here and we're saying that when you have the 3 species next to each other, which are the ones that normally need more space, that according to Rabbi Yochanan, we're saying that everybody would say 8 is sufficient and not needing 12.
Yes.
Why would onions make it worse?
Because onions are a weaker type of vegetable. They don't take up that much space. Let's go like this, Danny. When you have 3 people in a room, right? Think about it. And they're sitting in front of a teacher. And the guy to the right and the guy all the way to the left, they talk a lot.
Yeah.
If the guy in the middle by nature is already a weak talker, he won't make a peep. He won't have room. There won't be space for him. But if the guy in the middle is just as big as a talker as the guy to the right and to the left, so their personality won't overwhelm him that quick. So if the one in the middle is onions, then the outer ones have to have 12 amas space. And if it's within 12 amas, they overwhelm, they trap the middle one. But if the guy
I'm hearing the
middle,
words you're saying, but my brain is telling me the exact opposite. If you have 3 loud guys, you you need 12 amas between them.
No. The goal is we're just focusing on one part. What we're focusing is do the outer ones somehow inhibit the inner one? If they trap, there's a din of chavush. And we're saying that if the inner one is a weakling, then they trap him easier. So they have to have 12 amas, according to the Chachamim. Rabbi Yochanan is saying something logical. If the inner one is himself stark, then no, only 8 amas. Okay, makes sense. Let's go back there. That's Rabbi Chizkiya doesn't know. Chizkiya says, "Kamachleikas kan." Now, like guys, the next step of today's daf. Today's daf is so amazing. So what did we establish? That there is a minimum distance required from outer mukshas for them not to be choivish that which is planted in it. That's a good general statement. There is a minimum space needed between outer muksha, these 3 unique. If you don't have that minimum space, whatever is in it will be chovish. What did we not discuss? What is the length of these outer mukshas? Logically, there's got to be a place where if the length is so short, so even though it's muksha, they also cannot be chayvish the inner. There's got to be a minimum length. Nowhere do we find the minimum length. That's what we're looking to find. What is the minimum length of the outer ones that give them power? That if in the middle there isn't 8 amas, they trap in the middle. What is the length? What's the minimum length? Orkoi bekamo chayvish. How long does it have to be for you to say the din that we're speaking that it's chayvishing it? So Amar Rab Ze'era, he gives a gavaldik formula, and he makes an association. Okay, then we need today's final picture, which is, I know there's only one. It's gavaldik. It's few words, but it's thank God a few words. If you can put up the picture of the kedem. Now, before we read it, what we learn from the law of kedem. Let me tell you guys the law of kedem, and I want to say 3 steps in the law of kedem. Number 1, guys, remember this: that kedem, a vineyard, planting.
Sorry, about what page? What page is the picture
31a. 31a. There's only the flamadal. Guys, no foreign plant can be put in the ground near a vineyard. Now, hold on. Then, how far do I have? If I want to plant wheat, if I want to plant a vegetable, a carrot, what is the distance that I need between it and a kedem? So step number 1, guys, there is a halachic difference between a vine or a vineyard. The distance that I need from a halachic non-vineyard, a vine can be more than 1, but if it's not yet a kedem, all you need to have is 6 tfachim. Let's remember this. The moment halachically the vines are going to be classified, that's already a vineyard, right? It's a whole thing happening, a whole minyan. Now you have to have 4 ams. That's the din. What's the minimum vines that create a vineyard? So here we go. And even though the configuration that you're looking at is subject to a machloikis, I want to make it clear. All right.
These little trees here.
That's everyone is a vine. Very good. Everyone is 1 vine. And the minimum, guys, are 2 rows. And how many vines in each row? Listen to this. They're talking the minimum. 1 row, 3, and the other row, 2. That means if you even only have 5 vines, but they're not planted stem, they're planted the way you look at this picture. Now, really, there's another way you can plant it. We're not going to go there right now. For those of us who learned that Rambam, we know that. But look at this. This is called a vineyard. In other words, 1 row is 3, and 1 row is 2. Now, I want to go to another din. Go to each row itself. The distance then between every vine, when people plant the vineyard and they make rows, is 4 amas. And the 4 amas includes the space of the vine, which means that what is the distance? What's the length of the row of a kedem? Now, I know that 1 of 2 is only 4 amas, but you have to have 1 row of 3. In the row of 3, how many amas do you have? You have 8 amas. Very simple then, right? Because if you have to have 3 vines, and the space in between the 3 is 4 amas, and the 4 amas include the vine itself. So if you were to measure the minimum length of the bigger row of a kedem, it's 8 amas.
Is that 4 amas between where it comes out of the ground?
Yes.
Not the...
No, not exactly. In other words, if you were to measure the ground from the stalk of the outer one on one side, and the other side, you're going to have 8 amas. Now, a final step, when I'm saying a vineyard has to have 2 rows, then they have to combine. If I'm going to plant 3, and a mile away I'm going to plant 2, they're not going to combine. If the distance is more than 8 amas, they don't combine. Which means that there is a correlation between the distance and the length. The distance cannot exceed 8 amas, and the length is of 8 amas. Gavaldik. Now,
So it could be less than 8.
it can be less than 8, but
That's
very good, very good.
the
It's very good. It's the maximum, not the minimum. It's
Also,
not
the 4 amas between
the 4 amas is the maximum. In other words, is the minimum. The minimum.
the rows, they have to be 4 amas apart.
That's the way people plant them.
But the rows can be.
The rows cannot exceed more than 8 amas. So we see that there is a correlation. The same number that we are using for the space in between is the same length of the row.
So the rows there has to be a minimum for the rows to be apart. Isn't there?
Yeah,
4
amas, because you don't plant it within 4.
Yeah.
Very good. So now let's read it inside. Amar Abzeeda will learn from the din of a vineyard that kamod the Tamar Gabe Kerem, just like when it comes to a vineyard loy shanya, there is no difference in the number between the length of the row of 3. That is the same, which is 8. That is the same number of the heflegoi. Heflegoi means the maximum distance, right? Oinus haflaga, the maximum distance between the 2 rows. The max is 8. It cannot exceed more than 8. But 8 will still be good. That means you can have a distance that equals the length of the one of 3, of the bigger one. So let me use these words in English. The minimum length of the outer rows. What are we saying down over here? That in order for the outer rows to trap in the middle row, they have to have a minimum length. They can be the longer the bigger, the longer the stronger, the longer the worse. What is the minimum length? The minimum length of the outer rows is equivalent to the maximum distance. What's the maximum distance, guys? What would you answer to this?
4 amas.
No, in our dinim, what we're learning today, what's the
8.
maximum distance between
8.
8.
So machlokes. Now the answer is machlokes. According to Rabbi Yochanan, in the case of our Mishnah, ledivrei hakol 8. According to Chizkiah in our Mishnah, machlokes. Rabbi Akiva 8, and according to the Chachamim 12. And we're going to follow always the same formula. The formula is again that the maximum length of the outer rows have to be at least. The minimum length. The minimum length of the outer rows is equivalent to the maximum distance. Do you have to have a distance? Okay.
So you're taking the length number that we're looking for, and we're pulling it from the width number that we were talking about before. 8
Very good,
versus
Danny.
12.
My mom is very good. That's it. That's what Rabbi Zaida says.
Okay.
Now let's go. Now let's read it inside. Hold on. Al dato de Chizkiah. Now the Gemara is going to have a problem with Rabbi Yehuda. According to Chizkiah, what's the chiddush of Chizkiah says that even though the Mishnah here did not quote a machlokes, but really our Mishnah is subject to the same machlokes we're going to learn tomorrow. Then that fits. His formula fits, which is who is that? The Chachamim. Who is that? Rabbi Shmuel. Huf achi shtei mesrei. The minimum length of the outer rows for them to be able to become a problem is also 12. If they're not 12 amas long, they're not going to create chavush. And if it's not going to create chavush, then we go back to what we learned in Halacha Gimel. All you need to have is that furrow of 6 by 6, according to Rabbi Akiva. However, the one that says in tomorrow's daf and Halacha Hey that the distance between the 2 outer rows of gourds and the Mishnah and daf Lamed Beis and Beis is only 8. If you have 8, you're good, right? So that's a chumrah. That's simple. So that works. We're good with that. However, the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan today was that no, the machlekes is only later. Over here, because the middle one is itself a muksha, everyone holds that it holds more space for itself. So let's make a cheshbon. What are you going to say? You're going to say the length is bishmoina, because that is what Rabbi Yochanan holds. That lokula alma, the space here is only 8. I got a problem. What's my problem? Why don't I make a kal v'chaimer lemuksha ben absalim sheyachvaish bishmaina? Let me say these words, guys. That listen to this: the requirement of a longer distance, between the outer rows is a stringency. The more distance you need, we're saying that if you don't have that distance, the middle one will become prohibited. The whole thing becomes prohibited. It's adding to the distance between, you're not going l'kula, you're going l'chumra. The requirement of a longer outer row, Danny, the longer the outer row has to be, that's, if you say it has to be even longer, is that a kula or a chumra?
Chumra.
You don't need a picture. That is a kula.
Huh.
A kula.
Why?
Listen to that. Because if I am saying
more
that
have to
the outer
spread
row,
out.
if the outer row is not 12, if the outer row doesn't have a length of 12, it cannot create chavush. That's a leniency that will allow you to plant something in the middle. I just want to show you when the Gemara says kal v'chomer, what's the kal v'chomer? That we are equating the space in between with the length, but appreciate that the space in between, when you say you need to have more space in between, that's a chumrah. Like in tomorrow's daf, the sheet of the chachamim is a chumrah. They say that you have to have 12 amas in between the two deluyim. If you don't have 12 amas, it's chavush. So it's adding to the space of the distance is going in the direction of astringency. Adding to the length of the row is going in the direction of a leniency. Now,
so just to clarify, if you don't have the sufficient length, then what happens to the requirement of the space?
Then you don't need that requirement. It's a leniency. Then
so
there's
instead
no
of 8 or so I don't have the 8 or 12 length. Now the middle can be
good.
what?
It's good. It's like halacha gimel. As long as you have the furrow of 6 by 6, like Rabbi Akiva, you can plant the way one next to the other.
6 by 6 tefachim.
Yes, and only in 6 by 6.
And even with these gourds and
yes,
or whatever?
That's what we're saying.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow. So 1 second.
So
now,
why would you just artificially set up your
one second, Danny.
That sounds like it's
No. The last statement, I take it back.
okay.
Because 1 second. There's 2 dinim in the Mishnah. I got it. Danny, din number 1 is that for the 3 items mentioned, you need for 8. We need an 8 amas. For these items, you need an 8 amas.
Okay.
There's another din of chavush. We're focusing only on chavush. In contrast, Danny, on the Mishnah that we're going to learn tomorrow, halkap, when it's deluyim and onions, as long as you resolve, take away that picture, Kevin, put the picture of Rabbi Akiva. We're not going to look at Rabbi Shmuel. I don't know why you keep on going there. The top picture. Look, that's the very good picture. When it's not muksha and muksha, all right, when it's gourds and onions, as long as you resolve the chavush problem, let Rabbi Akiva, by keeping the gourds and the gourds away from each other, 8 amas, all you need to do between the onions and the gourds is the furrow. And the furrow is only taking up 6 by 6, which means that the vast majority of the row are mamash touching each other, and you're good. In our Mishnah, we're not talking about onions and gourds. We're speaking about from the muksha types, one with the other. Deluyim, kshuyim, and pulamitzri. This would not be good in our Mishnah then. Okay, that I want to clarify that. But we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the din of chavush. According to Rabbi Yechanan, the din of chavush, machloikis. It's not, even here it's a machloikis. I'm sorry, the opposite. According to Rabbi Yechanan, l'kula alma, all you need over here is the 8 amas. Oh, so now it says, let's read the kasha, ma im muksha ben ha-mukshiyos, which is an our Mishnah. She'ipasa koi choy lahatzal b'shmayna. We're saying, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that even the chachamim, who are more machmer over there, like we mentioned, the requirement of a greater distance between the outer rows is a chumrah. So if Rabbi Yechanan is saying that over here they're going to be lenient, even the chachamim l'divrei hakel will hold that the distance between the 2 outer rows is only right. Nachbash b'shmayna. So muksha ben apsalim she'ereisa koichel hatzal b'shtei mesrei is like called shchein she'yachbash b'shmayna. That will be the kasha gavaldik. In other words, this doesn't follow the formula all according to Rabbi Yechanan. the distance that prevents the outer rows from closing it in the inner rows, right? We're saying is the same as the length that allows the outer rows to close in the inner rows. It should not make sense. Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not following the same formula. It's very simple. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not following the same formula. Why is it not following the same formula? Because logically, because of the Kal V'chomer, we should say that if you need to have 12 amas in the next mission, if you need to have 12 amas of length to cover in, then if you need, which is a leniency, then we should be lenient. Then we should also be, for sure, we should be lenient that the space in between should be enough with 8. According to
those other two opinions, meaning the Chacham and Rabbi Yishmael?
Yeah, let's go again. According to Chizkiah, everything is consistent. It's either 12 and 12 or 8 by 8. It's either 12, 12, 8, 8. It's very simple. So quite like by the Kedem. It fits like by the Kedem. Now we're saying, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, no. It's not true. He's saying that in our Mishnah, everyone will hold that what? That 8 is enough. So if you hold 8 is enough, which is a leniency, then you should also be lenient by saying that you know how long it has to be. It has to be longer. It makes so much sense, this.
Meaning that the length needs to be 12 rather than 8?
That's what we're arguing. That according to Rabbi Yochanan, in our Mishnah, it only makes sense for the length to have to be 12.
So here Chachamim moedim to Rabbi Yochanan or not?
So according to Rabbi Yochanan, the formula of Rab Ze'eda doesn't work. Because logically, since Rabbi Yochanan is being more lenient, that's what Danny was shouting, we're being more lenient in our Mishnah. We're saying that even according to the Chachamim, the space in between only has to be of 8. Well, if you are lenient when it comes to the space in between, for sure, you should be lenient by saying that if it's less than 12, it should also not create chavush. In other words, what should be Rabbi Yochanan, Lechachamim, what should be Yakir, is that in our case, the distance, L'kula Alma, is 8. But the distance of the length, how long, it should have to be 12. And if you're going to have 8 to 12, then it doesn't go with the formula of Rab Ze'eda. That's equating hi arkai, hi aflegoi. Similarly, another same kasha from the other direction. That in Tamar Muksha Ben Absalim, which was we have in the next Mishnah, that's a stringency. Now comes that the words of Danny's question. Was if the next Mishnah, what is the Chachamim saying? Chachamim is saying, that if you have onions in between, and you have from both sides gourds, there has to be 12. And if it's less than 12, it's prohibited. That's a stringency. Is kal v'chomer lemuksha ben hamukshiyos. We should for sure be stringent. Danny, that's your kasha. Shalei yechavish ela b'shtei mesrei. What we're doing is we're taking Rab Ze'eda's formula and we're saying that they have to equate. And if they have to equate, then in the next
when you say Rab Ze'eda's formula, you're talking about the length equaling the width?
Yes. The problem is that we're putting together a kal and a chomer because the requirement for a longer distance between is a stringency. The requirement for a longer distance of the length is a leniency.
I would use the term wider in between.
Wider, okay. Very good. And the Gemara doesn't give an answer to that. Now, I want to hop another few words. I know it's already 7 o'clock because to bring all this up tomorrow will be impossible. One other detail now. The other detail is, the guys again, chavush. You know what? We can stop here. It's not true. It's good. God willing to be